My name is Daniel Reed. I'm 38 years old, and for most of my life, I thought I was a man who could handle anything. I worked construction, rain or shine, carried beams on my shoulders like they weighed nothing, and held my own when life threw its punches. But nothing prepares you for the day your little boy starts coughing and doesn't stop. Nothing. My son's name is Caleb. He's 5, almost 6. Smart, sweet, with these big brown eyes that always seem to be asking you questions, like he's trying to figure out the whole world. He's the best part of me, no question. The only good that came out of a marriage that nearly crushed me. I met my ex-wife Tara when we were both 23. She had this wild energy, the kind that draws you in and makes you think you're about to live the most exciting life ever. And for a while, I believed that. We got married fast, too fast probably, and the cracks started showing a year in. Tara loved excitement, not responsibility. And being a mom, it didn't come easy for her. She liked the idea of it more than the reality. Late nights turned into fights. Fights turned into silence. And one day, she just left. Packed her things while I was at work, left Caleb with a sitter, and vanished. I raised him on my own. Took every extra shift, learned to braid his hair in the mornings, sat in those tiny chairs at preschool events when no one else showed up for him. I made it work. Or I thought I did. Everything started falling apart one cold February morning. Caleb had been sniffling for a couple of days, but I figured it was just a cold. I gave him soup, kept him warm, and tucked him in tight every night. But that morning, his skin was burning. He was breathing fast, and when I touched his forehead, it was like touching the hood of a car that just came off the freeway. I rushed him to the hospital. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, his little body wrapped in a blanket next to me in the back seat. He was too quiet. That's what scared me the most. My son was never quiet. When the doctors saw him, they didn't waste time. They hooked him up to machines, started IVs, talked in words that didn't make sense to me. One of them pulled me aside and said, "We're concerned it may be a severe case of pneumonia. Possibly complications. We need to keep him here." I nodded, but I didn't really hear anything after complications. They moved him to a pediatric ICU. I stood there in the hallway, staring through the glass at his tiny frame lying so still. The machines beeped and hissed like something out of a nightmare. I'd never felt so helpless in my life. But here's the thing about being broke, you don't get to panic for long. The nurse told me I'd need to meet with the billing department. I was already behind on rent that month. The union job dried up a couple of weeks earlier, and I'd been picking up day labor wherever I could. I had about $42 in my checking account. So I did something I hated. I asked for help. The first call I made was to my parents. We hadn't been close in years, not since the divorce. They didn't approve of how I handled things, thought I should have tried harder to fix the marriage, like love was some leaky faucet you could patch up with duct tape and a wrench. Still, they were Caleb's grandparents. I called my mom first. She picked up after the second ring. "Daniel," she said, her voice cold like it always was when she wasn't expecting to hear from me. "It's been a while." "Mom, I need help," I said. My voice cracked, and I hated how weak I sounded. "Caleb's in the hospital. He's really sick. They think it's pneumonia, and I..." She cut me off. "Are you calling for money? I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious. I'm behind on rent, and the hospital bills are..." "Daniel, She sighed like she'd been waiting for this call for years. You made your choices. You insisted on keeping that child when Tara left. We told you it would be too much. He's your grandson, I said, louder now, the anger building in my chest. We're not a bank, Daniel. We're retired. We can't keep rescuing you from your poor decisions. Click. She hung up. I just stood there in the hospital parking lot with the phone in my hand, staring at the sky like maybe God would give me a reason not to scream. But he didn't. He was quiet, just like Caleb. I didn't know who else to call, so I did something even worse. I called Tara. She didn't answer the first time. Or the second. I left a message, told her it was about Caleb and that he was in the hospital. On the fourth try, she picked up. What now? She said, her voice thick with annoyance. Tara, it's Caleb. He's in the ICU. Pneumonia. They're saying it's serious, and I... Wait, she cut in, laughing. You're calling me for help? That's rich. I'm not joking. He's really sick. Yeah. So handle it. You're the one who wanted to play the single dad hero. Guess that didn't work out so well, huh? Tara, he could die. She went quiet for a second. I thought maybe something had finally pierced her shell. Then she said, You're pathetic, Daniel. You always were. Still waiting for someone to save you. Maybe if you spent more time being a man instead of whining, you wouldn't be in this mess. And she hung up. I don't remember much after that. I walked back inside, but everything was a blur. I sat by Caleb's bed, watching his chest rise and fall with each machine-assisted breath. I held his hand and whispered that I was there, that he wasn't alone. The doctors did everything they could. After 2 days, his fever started to go down. I slept in the chair by his bed, ate nothing but vending machine crackers, and pawned my tools to pay for parking and gas. One night, a nurse came in. Her name was Rebecca, and she had this quiet kindness about her. She looked tired, but she still smiled when she saw me awake. He's strong, she said. Like his dad, I'm guessing. I didn't answer. I was too tired. She sat down next to me. We have a fund for cases like this. It doesn't cover everything, but it helps. I just stared at her. You're not the first dad who's had to do this alone, she said gently. You won't be the last. I don't know what it was, but something in me cracked open right then. I started to cry. Not the kind of tears you wipe away quickly. I sobbed, right there in front of a stranger, because I had nothing left to hold back. And she let me. But life wasn't done with me yet. 3 days later, when Caleb finally opened his eyes, the doctors told me he was over the worst of it. He'd need rest, but he'd live. Those words, he'd live, felt like air rushing back into my lungs after being underwater too long. I thought we were turning a corner. But then the social worker showed up. Mr. Reed, she said, her tone professional but not unkind. We've had reports of financial instability and concern about your capacity to provide care. We're initiating an evaluation. I blinked. What? From who? She didn't say. But I knew. It was Tara. That night, after everything, after the hospital, after the rejection, after pawning the last thing I owned, I got a call from a caseworker asking me if I had a stable home address. And I didn't. Because while I'd been fighting to keep my son alive, my landlord had started the eviction process. That was the twist I never saw coming. They were going to take my son away. And I was about to lose everything. When the caseworker asked me if I had a stable home address, I couldn't lie. I told her the truth. "I'm being evicted," I said, barely above a whisper. "But it's temporary. I'm getting back on my feet." She sighed through the phone. "Daniel, I understand that you're doing your best. But Caleb's safety comes first. We'll need to arrange a temporary placement until this is resolved." I felt my heart crack in two. "Wait," I said quickly. "You can't take him. He just got better. He needs me. I've been here with him every second." "This doesn't have to be permanent," she said. "You'll have a chance to present your case. But right now, we need to make sure he has a stable environment to recover in." Stable. That word haunted me. What could be more stable than the arms of a father who would sleep on a hospital floor just to be near his son? I didn't have any power left to fight. I spent that night in the hospital bed with Caleb curled up against my chest. I held him while he slept. I whispered stories in his ear, stories about dragons and heroes and little boys who always found their way home. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Because I knew it was our last night together, at least for a while. The next morning, I watched them take him. He didn't cry. He just looked at me with those big brown eyes and said, "Are you coming too, Daddy?" I nodded. I lied. "Of course, buddy. I'll be right behind you." He held out his hand until the nurse gently pulled it away. And then he was gone. I sat in that room for hours after, surrounded by silence and the smell of antiseptic, and wondered how everything had come to this. I wasn't a bad father. I wasn't. But I was broke, alone, and according to the state of Illinois, unfit. They placed Caleb in temporary foster care with a woman named Susan Delaney. I only knew her name because I wrote it down 3 times on a napkin so I wouldn't forget it. She was kind when I spoke with her. She said Caleb was quiet, but okay. That he missed me. That he asked about me every night before bed. I promised him I'd come back for him. And I meant it. I started working double shifts doing roofing and drywall, whatever I could get my hands on. I lived out of my truck for a week and then in the back room of a friend's garage. Every night, I filled out paperwork for my custody hearing. I kept every receipt. I documented every paycheck. I even took photos of the meals I made for myself, cold sandwiches, fruit from the food bank, because I wanted to prove I was responsible. Even without money. Even without help. I reached out to a legal aid center. They connected me with a volunteer attorney named James Grayson. He was in his 60s, gray hair, glasses too big for his face. But he had this fire in his eyes when I told him what happened. "You're doing what most men wouldn't," he said. "And that counts for something." The court date came fast. I wore my only decent shirt, the one I hadn't worn since Caleb's last birthday. James spoke on my behalf. He told the judge about my work ethic, the hospital records, the eviction notice, and the proof of me trying to get stable housing. Then Tara showed up. She wore heels too high for a courtroom and a smile too smug for a mother who hadn't seen her son in years. She spoke to the judge like she was doing charity work by being there at all. "He needs a stable home," she said, echoing the same word the caseworker had used. "Daniel's a good man, but he's not reliable. Look at his history. No steady job, no home, and no support." The judge looked at her. "And you believe you're a more suitable guardian?" She hesitated. "I'm not saying I want custody. I just want what's best for the child." It was such a clever lie. She didn't want Caleb. She just didn't want me to have him. But what she didn't expect was that Susan Delaney, the foster parent, had something to say. She stood up from the back row and asked the judge for permission to speak. When she got it, she walked to the front and looked Tara dead in the eyes before turning to the judge. "I've cared for this child for 3 weeks," she said, her voice steady. "He's a bright, sweet, gentle boy. And every night, he asks for his father. Every night." She turned to me then. "And when I ask about his mother, he doesn't even know her name." The courtroom went quiet. Then she looked at the judge again and said, "In my experience, the parent who shows up is the parent who matters." The judge took a breath. He looked at me. "Mr. Reed, if you can provide proof of stable housing within 30 days, I will return custody to you. In the meantime, you will have full visitation rights, including overnight stays if arranged with a foster parent." That was the first time I'd cried in court. The next month was a blur. I worked like a man possessed. I borrowed tools, picked up side jobs, and found a single-room apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just a kitchenette, a bed, and a window that stuck when you tried to open it. But it was mine. I bought a mattress for Caleb with my first real paycheck. It had cartoon dinosaurs on it. I spent 2 nights just sitting in that little room, staring at the bed and imagining him there. 30 days later, I stood in that courtroom again. I handed the judge my lease agreement, photos of the apartment, and pay stubs from 3 different jobs. He read everything carefully. And then he said the words I'd prayed for. Full custody is returned to Daniel Reed, effective immediately. Caleb came home the next day. He ran into the apartment like it was a castle, touched everything with wonder, and wrapped his arms around me so tight I thought I'd break. "I missed you, Daddy. I missed you too, buddy. I missed you so much. We didn't have much, but we had each other. And that was more than enough." As for Tara, something changed after that day in court. Maybe it was the embarrassment. Maybe it was Susan's words. Or maybe she realized Caleb wasn't a trophy she could win. She stopped calling. She faded out of our lives entirely, just like before. Only this time, I didn't chase after her. I didn't need to. And my parents, I sent them a letter. Just a short one. I told them Caleb was safe, happy, and healthy. That we'd made it on our own. I didn't write to make them feel guilty. I wrote to show them I'd done what they said I couldn't. I never got a reply. I didn't expect one. Some people show you who they are when you're down. And others step in when you least expect it. Like Rebecca, the nurse. Like Susan. Like James, the old lawyer who still sends us Christmas cards. Caleb is 8 now. He's strong, funny, and way too smart for his own good. He says he wants to be a doctor one day. Maybe to help kids like he used to be. Maybe to help dads like me. Some nights, when he's asleep and the apartment is quiet, I think back to that hospital room. To the sound of machines and the feeling of hopelessness. And I remember how close I came to losing everything. But I didn't. I held on. And now, every time I hear him laugh, every time I see him run across the park with his shoes untied and his hair wild from the wind, I know one thing for sure. I may not have had money, or support, or even a home. But I had love. And that was enough to bring my son home.